But here's why I like it for everybody, because you can go from any type of real estate to any other type of real estate. You can go from any location to any location. You could go find places that have stagnated and go invest where it's going to grow. Who thought Austin, Texas would become God's own acre for real estate 15 years ago?
This is the Money Seed Podcast, where we discuss all things investing, plain and simple, the way it should be. Please remember, this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be investment advice. Welcome back to the Money Seed Podcast. Today, my guest is Dave Foster from the 1031investor.com. Dave Foster is an expert in 1031 exchanges, and he has an amazing story about how he used 1031 exchanges to fund his amazing 1 in a million type lifestyle. Dave found financial independence and was able to travel the world with his family on a sailboat. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here. I forgot to ask backstage, but if you're a sailor, we can just swap sailing stories for an hour and call it good. What do you think?
You know what? I must admit, I'm one of those individuals. I find the whole idea of sailing alluring and romantic and beautiful, but I've never really spent a whole lot of time on sailboats.
I'm a Kansas farm boy. My wife is from the middle of Minnesota. We met in Colorado. So far, I don't see anything that's a common ground for sailboats, but somehow we ended up on one. So go figure. What a story.
Awesome. And it's funny, I live here in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's water everywhere, and yet very few people here seem to own sailboats. I don't get it, but that's a story for another day. So Dave, why don't we start with your story? It sounds like you found real estate investing and you found this 1031 exchange, and then you were able to find financial independence and pursue your dreams. How did that all come about?
Yeah. So I think the thing that most people really need to know about me first is that I'm an accountant. I get that. So, you don't have to send Christmas cards or anything. I'm that bad guy that always tells you how much you owe, but I don't do accounting. I became an accountant because I was as concerned with the back door for my business ventures as I was with the front door. Now, in real estate, one of the big, proverbs is you make money in real estate when you buy it. Because when you buy it right, you can sustain loss on it. You're always getting appreciation. You've got instant profit. That's all absolutely right. When you buy real estate correctly, that's where you make your money. But what I saw early on was that the back door, which is the disposition of it and the taxation of it, was equally as important. So while you might make your money when you buy it, you keep your money when you sell it. So that's kind of the philosophy that I have in life. Those are the two ends of real estate investing, and that's where I really think you got to focus. So back up to 1996, since, yes, I am of the vintage of Zsa Zsa Gabor. You are absolutely right. We were both, my wife and I were what we call dinks. Do you know that term?
Double income, no kids.
Exactly. Living large, two high-profile careers, and this magical thing happened. We had our first child. And all of a sudden, the TV went into the garbage. All we wanted to do was just sit and look at this little bundle and wonder how lucky we could be. And it was right at that moment that we had this epiphany, which was that the most important thing in our life was not status, job, income, savings. The most important commodity in our life was time. And watching that little one, time just started to tick. How long are we going to get with this little guy and with any of his brothers and sisters that come along? So spending the next 10 or 15 years on the corporate train just to get a bunch of zeros did not feel very good. So we started to embark on Barnes and Noble date nights, to figure out what's going to be the thing that's going to get us off the rat race and give us the freedom and the time that we need to spend with our kid. And right away, real estate investing came to the forefront. And I'm a ready, fire, aim guy. So I said, great, we're going to invest in real estate. I went, I bought a duplex, I fixed it up, I sold it, and I thought I did awesome until I met with my accountant. By the way, the accountant who does his own taxes has a fool for a client. So I went to my accountant and he said, boy, are you going to owe a lot of taxes? And it was at that moment that I realized that every real estate investor has a silent partner. The silent partner's name is Uncle Sam. And if you're not careful, Uncle Sam will make more than you do. And that's what was happening. I said, this just isn't right. All of a sudden, our 10-year plan is looking 20 or 25 because of all this tax. There was right at that time a court case that had been settled over this thing called the 1031 tax deferred exchange that had been going for 20 years, where now regular investors, just like you and I, Gabe, were going to be able to sell investment real estate and use the proceeds to buy new investment real estate and get to indefinitely defer paying the tax in the middle. Well, boom, that was the light that needed to go off. So immediately I started looking into it. Some friends and I started a business to do 1031 exchanges for others. I started to embark on it. And 10 years later to the day, we managed to move our portfolio from Denver, Colorado to Connecticut to Florida and moved on to a sailboat bought with tax-free dollars and fund our life on it with our vacation rentals that we'd purchased with tax-deferred dollars. And we were able to raise our kids for 12 years on the boat.
Amazing.
Best time ever.
That's amazing. So getting back to that first duplex that you bought, was that a fix and flip?
It was. That was the problem. Because my intent was I'm going to fix it and sell it. And when you do that, one of the things you learn is, first of all, two of the things you learn. First of all, you're going to pay a much higher tax on your profits because you haven't owned it across a year, so it's not a long-term capital gain. Secondly, it's not eligible for 1031 treatment. So you make $100,000 on a property, and you're probably going to pay around 20% to the government in tax. Now, that's on the low end. If you're in California, where you live, you're going to pay almost 40% of your gain to the government. How can you make money doing that? You want to be able to defer that using the 1031. And so that $40,000 for you, Gabe, how easy would that be to take that and use that as a down payment on another rental? And when you do that, guess what? You not only don't have to pay tax, but now you're making money on the deferred tax. And the tenants are paying your mortgage. And it just becomes this nice, happy mixing bowl of chocolate chip cookie love because it's all going your way. And it's really just a form of compound interest, isn't it? You make money on the taxes, then you make money on the money you made on the taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. And I've done videos before on the idea of what happens to a portfolio when you keep disrupting the compound growth, right? Because that's what capital gains does, is you have an investment and it grows and it compounds, and then boom, when you got to pay taxes on it, it disrupts the compounding and eats away at whatever's in that portfolio. And then the compounding has to start all over again. So the effects on it over 20, 30 years can be huge, right? Can be absolutely huge.
Absolutely.
So let's walk through a hypothetical example. Let's say I buy a property, an investment property for $100,000. I own it for, let's say, 5 years, and it doubles to $200,000. And now I want to sell it, right? So the federal government's going to say, hey, wait a minute, you bought it for 100, you're selling for 200, that's $100,000 in long-term capital gains. You got to pay capital gains tax on it, which, as you mentioned, is 20%, or in places like California, it's almost 40. How does the 1031 help defer the taxes?
Well, first of all, it's even worse than that because there's this ugly little game of pretend that the IRS is going to do to you called depreciation. And I'm sure you've dealt with this on your store before, on your show before. But when you own a piece of real estate, the IRS gives you this gift where they allow you to pretend that your property loses value every year. Well, that's nice because you get to write that off on your taxes and life is good until you sell the property. And then the IRS plays Scrooge and says, hey, wait a minute, we want that back now that you sold. So on that property, you could have $25,000 of depreciation that had been taken off before. So when you sell, you don't just have a gain of 100,000, you actually show a gain of 125. So that's even worse taxation. What the 1031 allows you to do is you sell that property just like you normally would. And you follow a couple timelines and you reinvest purchasing new property or properties that are worth at least $200,000. And at the end of that, by completing the 1031 process, all of the tax on that $125,000 goes into the new property. It does not disappear yet. We probably want to talk about that at some point in this show, but it doesn't disappear yet. But you never have to pay it as long as you own that new property. So here's probably the most common scenario that people will use. They will sell that $200,000 property. They'll use their proceeds to go buy not one, but $200,000 properties. They'll use the money as down payment. Now, why do they do that? Well, it's growth, first of all, because the more real estate you've got under your belt, the more money you're making. But it's also a comfort level. If they're investing in these properties, they probably feel comfortable in that demographic. If I'm buying $100,000 properties, I know who I'm going to rent to. I know how to fix it up so they like to rent it. I know whether I put hardwood floors or granite countertops in, all that kind of thing. But all of a sudden, when I sell that property for $200,000, well, $200,000 might be a different point. It might take a different type of countertop. It might take a different kind of laminate. I might have to advertise differently. Things that I don't know about. So the 1031 allows you to defer the tax, use it for your own purposes, but stay inside the demographic or the niche that you feel comfortable with. And then there's one other thing that goes with that, and you'll be very familiar with this. Usually the more expensive the property, the lower the dollars per square foot of rent you get. So it's a way of maximizing your revenue stream. You might be able to rent a $100,000 property for $1,000 a month, but you might only be able to rent a $200,000 property for $1,500 a month. So by buying $200,000 properties, you increase your cash flow every month. So those are all the kinds of things that go into the thought process for a 1031 investor.
Got it. Dave, maybe walk us through some of the misconceptions or mistakes people make with the 1031.
So lack of planning, which I guess is kind of like the biggest mistake anybody makes with anything, right? Lack of planning. The 1031 requires that you use the services of an unrelated third party called the qualified intermediary. Now, that's somebody like us, where that's all we do. I can't do your taxes. I can't be your realtor. My partners who are attorneys cannot draw up your wills. All we can do is process 1031 exchanges.
That's interesting. I've never heard that, Dave. So the regular accountant I use to do my taxes cannot be used to
Cannot.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. The IRS, now remember, this is the result of a court case they lost. So imagine a grumpy IRS that has to let you do them, but they don't have to make it easy. So immediately they jump to the assumption that every investor is out to cheat them. So you have to use an unrelated third party. And our job is to document the exchange at the closing of the sale and the closing of the purchase and to hold the proceeds. You cannot touch them. So thinking about planning, we have to be in place before you close the sale. And I do still get calls every month from someone saying, I sold my property last week. I've got the money in my account, or it's at the title company. I'm ready to do a 1031. All I can do is weep and send them a gift certificate for a beer that they can drown their sorrows in, because they can't do a 1031 at that point. So extremely critical to plan ahead. Not to mention the fact that as we go through some of our other scenarios here, you'll start to see how advanced planning, like for us, it was years of planning how to arrive where we wanted to. Each step does not happen by itself. You got to build on it, just like you talked about, building on the compounding effect. And 1031 is no different. But the second reason why planning is so important is that from the date of the closing of your sale, you only have 45 more days to identify your potential replacement properties. Whoa, 45 more days. That's it. So it's extremely critical that you already have a really good idea of where you're going to invest, of what you're going to invest in. I mean, to the point where many of our clients will actually have their new property under contract before they close the sale of their old property. And that's perfectly fine. The order of the 1031 simply has to be that you close the sale before you close the purchase. But, you're up in the Bay Area there, Gabe. I tell you what, last year before last, we would have people who would call us and not even put their property on the market, knowing that the most difficult job was to find their new property. And when they found their new property, they would get a 30-day escrow on it. And then they would list their old property and it would sell in a week and close in 2 weeks. That was insane. But that's how you can mitigate the angst of that 45 days. Because once 45 days passes, you can't change your list anymore. And you're stuck with what's on it. You only have 180 days to close on your purchase. That's not so bad. But that 45 will really get you. So advanced planning is really important.
So it sounds like you really need to identify the property that you're going to buy and be confident that you can sell your property in a certain amount of window, and then basically get the ball rolling with the paperwork.
Yeah, or at least know where you're looking. Honestly, the probably 98% of the exchanges that I've seen fail in the last couple of years are because the client was not laser focused. I mean, it was literally the kind of thing where, oh gosh, I think I might want to go to Ohio or Tennessee, or I might want to do commercial property, or I'm really thinking about short-term rentals. They had no focus. And with the 1031, you can move from one type of real estate into any other type of real estate you want, as long as it's used for for investment purposes. And you can also move from anywhere in the country to anywhere else. So think about what a broad, area that is to choose from. If you're not focused, there's no way you'll be able to get enough due diligence done so that you end up with a good property you feel comfortable with. And as I tell people, the worst thing in the world is not to let a 1031 exchange die. There's no penalty for doing that. You simply pay the same tax you would have when you would have, but it is never the deal you don't get that kills you. It's the one you do get that you shouldn't have. So my grandpappy always said, nobody ever went broke paying tax on profit. It just feels like it.
Dave, you mentioned some of the requirements already, such as identifying the property you want to buy, getting the paperwork started before you close the sale of your existing property, et cetera. Are there any other requirements that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, of course, using the QI. The taxpayer for the old property has to be the same as the taxpayer on the new property. So typically the deeds need to be the same. There's some exceptions to that we help to work people through that we really don't have time to mess with tonight. But that's, again, part of planning to help you get to where you need to get to. The reinvestment requirements are probably the second most onerous after the timing. And that is, and it's really interesting. In order to defer all tax, the IRS says you must do two things. First, you must use all of your cash proceeds. So that's the amount at the end of the sale that goes into your exchange account. You have to use all of that in the purchase of your new real estate. Secondly, you have to purchase at least as much as your net sale. Doesn't have to be one property, could be more than one. And you can also combine two exchanges into one larger property. I know we'll talk about that in a minute. That's called consolidation. When people are wanting to go, say, from single family rentals into larger multifamily projects and that kind of thing. But the key is the valuations, not the number of properties. So let's say you sold a property for $320,000. And by the time closing costs and commissions came out, your net sale was $300,000. You actually, let me change that. I'm going to change that to 530,000. Your net sale is 500,000, and there was a $200,000 mortgage that was paid off. So your net sale, $500,000. That's how much you have to buy. The cash that you have to use in the purchases, 300,000. Use 300,000 to buy at least 500,000 in real estate, and you'll defer all tax. You can buy less than you sell. You can take cash out. When you do that, though, interestingly enough, the IRS says you're always taking profit out. Now, I always get this argument, but Dave, and I see you thinking about it right now, but Dave, I put $20,000 down. That's not taxable. Can't I get that back? Now, the IRS is never going to charge you tax on that. But what they say is when you take 20,000 out and you're doing a 1031 exchange, you're not taking out that $20,000. They say you're taking out profit first. Is that rude or what?
Incredible. I mean, I'm not surprised, but disappointed. Yeah.
Unfortunately, they have the nuclear weapons, so we are hostage. So, but as long as you do that, you'll defer all tax. So that's where people can creatively pull money out, pay a little bit of tax, but then go buy the rest and defer the rest of the tax.
Dave, you said something a few minutes ago that I want to rewind back to. You said something about deferring tax indefinitely, and then I think you said something about maybe not ever paying that tax. What did you mean?
Well, are you ready for a pop quiz? I'm going to give you a pop quiz, okay?
Let's do it.
You up for it?
Yeah.
All right. So there's 4 D's of 1031 investing. I'll give you the first one. It is defer. Because when you sell a piece of real estate that you've held for investment purposes and do a 1031 exchange, you get to indefinitely defer paying the tax on that profit and depreciation recapture, and you get to instead use those dollars for your benefit by buying more real estate. Makes sense, right? That's the concept. What would you think the second D would be?
Ooh, okay. I'm reaching here. I'm going to say death. They get you when you die.
Well, there may be something to that, but the second D is cheating. It's a defer as well. Because as you go through what I call the life cycle of a real estate investor, from novice to experienced, from young to old, you will have opportunities where you will want to change locations. Maybe you ride the California wave of appreciation, and then it's time to get out because you want to go into Kansas City where appreciation isn't great, but cash flow is better. Or maybe you want to change type of real estate. So you're done with single families. You want to go invest in short-term rentals in the Smoky Mountains. Or you're wanting to go from active to passive. So you sell single family rentals and you bundle those together to buy a multifamily where you can have in-house management. All those kinds of things can be done, again, with 1031 exchanges so that you continue to ride that compounding wave and continue to defer all the tax. Now, the third D, I'll bet you know what it is.
David,
I already gave you a hint of two.
It's another defer?
It's another defer. Come on, you're all over this. Yes. And here's why. Because as you get to that critical moment where you really want to slow down, here is the most awesome hack that your listeners will hear tonight. So hopefully we're getting close to the end so they don't leave early. When you do a 1031 exchange, you're selling investment property that you have held with investment intent. You are buying investment property that you intend to hold for investment purposes. But you do not have to hold that property that way forever. You can change the use of investment property by moving into it and converting it into your primary residence. That does not create a taxable event. So here's an example of that. The folks in Ohio that have snow shovels in their garage and they want to retire in Sarasota, Florida. They start to position their portfolio before retirement. Let's talk about planning, right? And they 1031 exchange their investment properties to Florida. When they retire, where are they going to move? Into one of those properties. Because when they sell their home in Ohio, there's a section in the code called Section 121 that lets you take from your primary residence. If you lived in it for 2 out of the previous 5 years, you get to take as a married couple the first $500,000 of profit tax-free. Do you know how many times you could do that in your life? Once every 2 years.
Amazing. Wow.
By itself, that's the single greatest investment tool you've got.
So in theory, Dave, hang on. So in theory, if someone has, let's say, 5 investment properties, they could, in theory, move into one of those every 2 years. And then basically you move 5 times in the span of like 10 years. And you have this opportunity to not pay tax on $500,000 of profit each time.
There's going to be some restrictions about that I'll get to in just a second. But the answer is a qualified yes. Here's how Dave and Vicky used it to get to the sailboat. Because remember I said I bought the sailboat with tax-free dollars. When we were living in Colorado, every time we sold our primary residence, the tax-free money went into the buy the boat fund. Our last house in Colorado was a house that we converted into our primary residence, and that was the last 2 years. The rest of our portfolio, we 1031 to Stamford, Connecticut. After 2 years, we sold the Colorado house. And yes, prior to 2008, all of the gain was tax-free. It was crazy. And the IRS did figure that out. And in 2008, they took my picture off of their lunchroom wall and changed the law. But what we did was we moved to Stamford. The last house in Stamford was a conversion of a primary residence. Where did we move in Florida? Into one of our former investment properties. At each spot, we took that money tax-free. And that's how we bought the boat. Now, since the rules have changed, it's not quite as simple. But here's the example you were talking about. I have a client who is a realtor on St. Pete Beach. And he has done 1031 exchanges into 3 identical beachfront condos on the same floor in the same building. And what he did was he rented them out and then he retired. And when he retired, he sold his St. Petersburg house. That money was tax free. He moved into the first of those properties. Now, once he has owned that property for 5 years, that's a new twist. He has to have owned it for 5 years. And once he has lived in it for 2 out of the previous 5 years, then when he sells it, he will get to take a proration of the gain, tax-free. So the first property he moved into after a couple of years. So let's say he finishes living in it for 3 years. So did he own it for 5? Yep. Did he live in it for at least 2 out of the previous 5? Yeah, he lived in it for 3. So he will get to take 60% or 3/5 of the gain tax-free. He'll pay tax on the other 40%. And to your example, where's he going to move? Next door. So while you and I might go deliver pizzas or bag groceries to make a little W-2 income to supplement retirement, he's just going to the back deck and making coffee every day. And every couple of years, he'll pay a little bit in tax and he'll get a bunch tax-free. That is truly the greatest advantage. And that is how you make the third D of deferral work. Another transition that you can do is to start to buy properties near where your children are. We had a family sell a farm, and they 1031 into 3 different properties near each one of their 3 kids. And the deal was the kids were going to manage the properties so mom and dad could have fun in retirement. When they die, the kids get the properties. So they were motivated. Parents got the money in the meantime. All done with the 1031 exchange. So what did we figure out from that? Well, number one, the residential part of the farm was tax-free. The investment part of the farm went tax deferred into those properties. They had motivated management. They got more money than they ever did farming. Grandma figured out that every trip to go see the grandkids now was a business write-off to go see their investment properties.
Amazing.
And here's where the 4th D comes in. And I'm not going to ask you, although you've already said it, it ain't defer, it's die. And the reason is that it's last is because it ain't my favorite. But we're all heading there anyways, so let's talk about it. When you die owning real estate, your heirs get that property at what is called a step up in basis, which means they inherit it as if they paid market value for it on the day you die. Your estate doesn't pay the tax. They don't pay the tax. It literally goes away. And they get to start over with the 1031 exchanges on their own. I have a family in Connecticut. We are now on their 3rd generation.
Amazing.
I was doing exchanges for the grandfather. And when he passed away, his son inherited the portfolio. And it took a while because, right, he didn't have any gain first. But he took over managing the portfolio. And in a very few short years, he was doing his own 1031s. And then when he died, his heirs inherited the property tax-free. And now we are once again starting to do 1031 exchanges for them. That's 3 generations, not a penny paid in capital gains tax.
Amazing. Mind blown.
Isn't it? So to those people who like to go, you're going to have to pay it anyways. Why not pay it now? You and I both know the answer. Because every day you use the money, you get to make money off of it. So whether it's one day or 20 years, it's to your benefit to do it. But the second answer is because you don't have to ever pay it. There's plenty of ways to avoid it, and you get to make the money throughout your lifetime. About the only people, there's only two people that I would recommend do not 1031. The first one are the people who are no longer going to invest in real estate. Now, there's a bunch of things that qualify as real estate, but aren't really, like mineral rights, oil and natural gas are all 1031able. Boat docks, mobile homes, if you own the land, things like that, and some fractional opportunities like these things called Delaware statutory trusts, which are kind of beyond this discussion as well, but they're passive ownership and they act like you're buying a share of a REIT or something. But the IRS specifically blessed them for 1031 purposes. All of these things, as well as any other type of investment in real estate, can be used with a 1031. So the only people that I would recommend don't, if you are dead set on getting out of real estate because you want to go buy Apple or Rivian or whatever, then you should not do a 1031. But like you have always said, as I listen to you, the second you do that, you've broken that compounding chain and you're now starting over. Why do that? Now, the second group of people that I would recommend do not do 1031 exchanges are fixer flippers. And let's talk about that in just a second. But here's why I like it for everybody, because you can go from any type of real estate to any other type of real estate. You can go from any location to any location. You could go find places that have stagnated and go invest where it's going to grow. Who thought Austin, Texas would become God's own acre for real estate 15 years ago? Right. But those who sold in the Bay and followed Elon down there are making money hand over fist, aren't they? That's what the 1031 is there for. You tired of being a manager? Go buy bigger properties with less management. You want to aggressively grow? Then use the diversification exchange. Sell one and buy several. There's just so many ways to use it. And every way that you do gives you the use of the deferred tax that, honestly, I know I sound like a raging Hare Krishna disciple here, but I really believe in them because I've used them and the impact is incredible.
Dave, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us today. It's definitely got the wheels turning. Dave, tell us a little bit more about your life aboard the sailboat. What was it like to live aboard a sailboat with your wife? And I believe it was 2 children, correct?
4 boys.
All on the sailboat together?
All on the same boat.
Oh, my word. Okay. Well, tell me a little bit more. I mean, like, where did you guys go? How big was the boat? That kind of thing.
Right. So it was a 53-foot sailboat, which is big for sailboat reasons. But I'm sorry, you put 6 people into a 450 square foot apartment, it's still going to be pretty small. But that was kind of the beautiful thing about it, is we were always in everybody's business. So talk about being a close-knit family. It was awesome. Now, you've got young kids yourself, right?
Correct. 2 girls, yeah.
2 girls. Do you ever do the timeout thing?
I mean, yeah, not so much now. I mean, they're getting bigger and bigger, but when they were young, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, it saves your nerves. It gives them a chance to contemplate what they were doing. So check this out. Where do you send people for timeout on a 53-foot sailboat? Where do you go? We would untie the dinghy and put it off the back of the boat and make them go sit in the dinghy. It was awesome. And of course, within 2 minutes, you'd start to hear the screams of laughter and they're beating each other with oars and splashing in the water and having fun. But mom and dad are just enjoying peace. It was really fun. There are those salty individuals that will tell you that the best day of their life was the day they bought their boat. And the second best day of their life was the day they sold their boat. Not for me. The second worst day of my life, the best day of my life was buying the boat. The worst day of my life was selling it because it was magical, but it was magical, okay, because we had captured that commodity, which was time. We couldn't own it forever, but we maximized that time that we had with those boys. And so we sailed all over the Keys and Florida, the Bahamas, east and west coast of Florida. Met some amazing people, did some amazing things. And to this day, our boys who are now 26, 24, 19, they all still think of themselves as boat kids. So we're eagerly looking forward to see if we're going to see some boats in their future.
Amazing. How many years did you guys spend on the boat?
We lived on it full time for 10. We owned it for 12. And yeah, it was awesome.
Amazing. That is a really cool story. Dave, where can people reach out to you if they have questions about the 1031?
So we wanted, as you could tell, like from the surprises that I gave you, 1031 is not something the IRS is going to teach you. So real early on, I decided that we needed to make a niche providing education. We've got to teach people about it. So we developed the 1031investor.com. And it's as much an educational website as anything. It'll link you to our 32-part YouTube series that talks about everything 1031. We've got calculators that can help you run calculations on your gain. We have staff that stand by just to help you figure those calculations. You can schedule time directly with them. We have articles, and then, of course, we have consultations with folks like me who can help you understand how you can use them based on how we use them, and also to help you get to where you want to get to. Because that's as important as anything. It's not where I got to on my journey. It's where do you want to go on yours and how we can help you get there.
Amazing. Dave Foster from the 1031investor.com. Dave, thanks very much for telling us about the 1031 exchange. It's something that every single real estate investor should know about. Dave, thank you very much.
Thank you.